Dear Dr. Galluft, can you hear us? Okay. Now we are starting our afternoon session of Sepip conference. Our session, the invited speaker is Dr. Galluft of OSTİM Technical University of Ankara, Turkey. Sir, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to be back with OSTİM. Today I will discuss the issue of the day of industrial policy and economic planning, but try to focus on it from the eye of an entrepreneur, a technology entrepreneur, which I happen to be, at least in one of my hats, who is working in a number of countries, and to try to put it in the context of the very special international circumstances that we are in today. Let me try to put some framework where I think we are in history, where I think we are in a very unique period, and we don't have a lot of historical references. And of course, it's very hard to really compare. But the last time that humanity was facing the kind of pandemic situation was about 100 years ago, with the Spanish flu that came on top of a world war. So we had a world war, and immediately after that, a pandemic, and millions of people died. It's interesting to see, to learn from this episode is what happened after that. So there are two completely different futures, but both of them happened. One future economic crisis. We had a massive inflation. We had a rise of populist nationalist movements, rise of communism, Nazism, fascism, all kind of movements that capitalized on the
Sir, can you hear us? Dr. Galluft? Yes,
yes.
Yeah, we froze just for a second.
Okay. So what I was trying to say, I don't know when you lost me, is that the period we had in post-pandemic, post-Spanish flu, gave rise to essentially the chain of events that led to World War II. But there was also a happy story there too that we sometimes tend to forget, and that was the what we call the Roaring '20s, which was a very special time in history in which we had an explosion of innovation, emerging new sectors, emerging technologies. We had massive commercialization of the automobiles, aviation, the movie industry. Women became a much bigger part of the workforce. So we had a lot of positive development. And 100 years later, we started trying to understand how this pandemic will shape our future when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to industrialization. And what we see is, and you hear every day, you hear about supply chain disruptions, you hear about rising cost of shipment, you hear about energy crisis in China, in India, in Europe. A lot of these kind of things that build on each other, and they're all interconnected. And the reason that much of this is happening is that over the past 20 years, we have our economy in ways that manufacturing shifted to those places with cheap labor, and there was heavy centralization, not only in terms of manufacturing, but also in terms of financing. The access to capital became very centralized. And today, we have, until recently, until the pandemic, and we had a very well-oiled and lubricated machine. Everything worked perfectly. There was concept of just in time. We produced in a very centralized way with mass production. This era now is shifting, is changing. And I think from much more decentralized, and we're already seeing it, that from the places of the cheap labor to the places where you have regulatory stability, and also in the places where you have access to parts, access to components, and access to capital. Entrepreneurs, one of the things that we have seen that, until recently, if you want to develop something really great, you really had to go to Silicon Valley, okay? Today, if you go to Silicon Valley, your chances of success are much, much lower. And why is it? Because you don't have the same access to capital, you don't have the cost, the over-centralization of the industry is happening there. And technology is migrating to places where it can find those kind of inputs more easily. I think that what we are thinking when we talk about the role of government in all of this, what would you like the role of government to be when you talk about technologies in the future? For example, I'm in robotics and AI. My company is developing the first commercial scale humanoid robot, which has a lot of applications and can be used as a personal assistant, can be used in defense, in healthcare, in education, and solve many problems. But when we are looking at the challenge of building something like this, we need to have a lot of inputs. So, for example, when I build a robot, we need about 300 microchips that go into this robot. And a very difficult supply chain when it comes to microchips. Auto industry and other industries are stalling their production. And for us, it's very important to understand how to create the ecosystem in which we have access to all of those inputs. Now, the good news is that when it comes to software, we have learned how to decentralize. We know how to build a software ecosystem with people all over the world. They don't have to be sitting in the same office space, but we work as a community and develop the software. When it comes to hardware, things become very difficult. And it's very different. We have to appreciate the difference between hardware and software. Over the past 20 years, we have put a lot of effort into the software world. Everything that goes into your social media, for example, has to do with software, right? But all this software would not be possible. You could not host it if you didn't have the smartphone, which is a hardware device. And we've seen a situation in which the technology and innovation have shifted from the domain of atoms, things that you build, physical things, into the world of bits, which is essentially a software product. I think that when we look into the future, into what is going to happen in the next 10, 20 years, you will see much more emphasis back into the building of the physical objects and the creation of ecosystem which software and hardware can coexist. And here is what I want to see the role of government. When you build a hardware product, you need two things. You need access to tools and you need access to capital. Tools is a highly specialized tools that you cannot obtain, go to the hardware store and get those tools. Okay, these are very complex tools, very expensive tools. And the problem is that many entrepreneurs cannot really access those tools because they're so expensive. And therefore, we have a problem of acceleration. How do you build something from idea to a product? I have an idea. I want to build a smart coffee machine. Well, I have all the designs, everything, but I want to build a prototype. Then I run into problems of specialized tools. So if we have a government that offers incubation or incubators, technology incubators, where you have access to tools, you shorten time between an idea and a product. And what happens is you allow many people that otherwise would be excluded from the marketplace and could not fulfill their dreams to enter and to build products and gain access to the market. The same is true for capital. We had over the 2 or 3 decades of very intensive centralization of capital. Today, if you're a young entrepreneur, you want to build something, you have an idea, unless you come from a very well-connected family or social circle, your chance of raising capital is very small. And if you don't have access to capital, you cannot fulfill your dream. So I think this is where, when we think about the future of industrial policy and economic planning, it's very important to empower or unleash the innovation by unblocking people's access to capital and specialized tools, and also allowing them to work in environments that is more catered towards sharing and cooperation. And I want to say a word about that, because I think that one of the things that I see when I work with young entrepreneurs is that the new culture is much more of collaboration and sharing than it used to be in the past. In the past, when I had an idea and I had a little bit of money, I would think, okay, how can I dominate the market? How can I protect myself? How can I surround myself with patents that nobody can copy me, nobody can take my idea and compete against me? I think today we have a different mindset in which we embrace cooperation, and we also embrace competition. And your energy and money are invested not only in how do I protect my patents or my IP, but how do I go ahead of the, so by the time that somebody wants to copy me, I'm already in generation number 3 or number 4 or number 5. So I'm so ahead in terms of my innovation that I don't have to worry about somebody stealing iPhone 1 when okay. So it's a very more and more in a collaborative setting. Not only collaboration, but also international collaboration. In my company, for example, we have people from different countries working on a daily basis. They all live in different places, in different time zones, but somehow they work together to develop. Especially now, it's very important in the time of the pandemic when travel is so cumbersome and difficult. And we have but of course we need tools. The fact that I can speak to you today from a different location, that's part of the kind of revolution that is happening before our eyes thanks to this pandemic. It will also go into other sectors of our lives, into consulting, into education, into healthcare. Today you don't have to go to your doctor's office and sit there. You can communicate with your doctor virtually, and if there is a special reason why you need to go to his office, you will, but most people can solve the problems even without doing it. So this is the kind of thing that we will see more and more. We have a layer of difficulty that has been imposed on all of us, and I cannot even explain in full why it happened, but on the other hand, I don't want to underestimate the impact of this, and that is the relatively sudden and unfortunate deterioration in the relations between the two largest economies of the world, China and the United States. Now, why this is so difficult? Because when you have more and more barriers, more and more export control, more and more tariffs, and the flow of ideas is restricted, scientific collaboration is restricted. People are afraid. There is all kind of prosecutions against people who cooperate on the two sides of the Pacific. These are extremely troubling development because it causes the markets to segregate themselves and to supply chains against to instead of forming synergies, we all now are talking about self-sufficiency, resiliency, and that I think is a very negative development in our life now, because when I build a robot and all of the moving parts are made in China, but the brain, the processor that makes all of this happen is made by an American company. I have to make a choice. How do I build a product that can withstand the growing deterioration in the relationship between those two industrial hubs? And as those two economies gradually decouple, that goes into my choices. I have to consider this, something that a technology entrepreneur never had to do. I have to consider what type of components I want to use, because I don't want to be in a situation that I don't have access to certain components when I go into mass production. Now, this is a problem, because then you begin to compromise quality. Now I have to think about, okay, if my number one priority is supply chain resiliency, maybe I should settle for an inferior, but one that I am more certain that will not impose on me all kind of restrictions in supply. But then I compromise on quality. And I don't want to compromise on quality, because when I build something, I want to build the best product that I can. So these are the kind of choices that we have to make. And unfortunately, they are imposed on us because of the geopolitical situation, because of the growing tension between those two economies. So I hope I gave you a little bit of a taste of, because we always talk about industrial policy from the eyes of the governments, but governments aim to serve the people that actually build and innovate and manufacture, and to empower them. This is my understanding of the role of government, not to weaken them, not to impose onerous regulations, not to make their life more difficult than they already are, because anybody who has experienced the innovative process knows how painful and difficult it is as it is. And I think that because governments are typically not taking part of the innovation process, sometimes they're supported through R&D, but the people who sit and make the policies are not the people that actually build things in the end of the day. Need to really take a deep bottom to top approach and better understand the needs and the challenges of the what I call the innovative class, without which you cannot really build a society. I mean, we are all today looking at our phones, but if not for Steve Jobs deciding to build an iPhone, we would not have all those wonderful millions and millions of applications that we're using on a daily basis. Somebody had to create the building blocks for this ecosystem. And this is what my message is. Let's always look at those building blocks and not to take a top to bottom approach where we impose certain rules and sort of trickle down, but really to understand their needs and to build it from the bottom to the top, so that we create the best conditions to that the coming years will resemble more the Roaring '20s than the alternative scenario, which led us to World War II. And with this, I thank you very much, and I wish you all continue a successful conference. Thank you.
Dr. Gallo, thank you so much for your presentation, for your explanation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.